Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today is going to be a little bit different than usual. I am doing my first ever care video for a specific plant, and I really am only doing this because it's been one of my most requested videos, and I do feel more confident about talking about the micans versus really any other plant in my collection. So you're not going to see a ton of these like specific care guide videos for certain plants on this channel, just because I don't feel like I'm the right person to go to for that kind of thing. But with the micans, I've been through a lot with this plant over the years, and I do think that I have a few things that I can share that might be useful to people. So we've got a lot of things to cover, everything from watering, humidity, fertilizing, pests, propagation, blah, blah, blah. Not only have I put together a little list of things I want to talk about, but I also opened my questions on Instagram to have people just ask me whatever they want about micans, so I'm going to integrate that as well. But I think that a good place to start for this video is just introducing you to my micans. I actually have, I think 4 mican, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 micans plants in my collection. This is my biggest and my oldest, which is why I'm using her as an example in this video. I acquired her in late 2019 as a 5-inch plant that was in soil, and she has been with me ever since. It was definitely not this big when I got it. I will throw in a photo of what she looked like when I first acquired her. I think I got this plant December of 2019, and I didn't actually post it until February 2020 on my Instagram, mostly because my sister had it for a little bit in California and I wasn't able to get there. So it was a little bit rehabby for the first few months, but by February it was looking pretty decent. Yeah, this is what it looked like, and we've definitely come a long way since then. You can see it's a lot bushier than it was before. I think when I first got the plant, I started with about 6 stems in the pot, and if I had to guess right now, there are probably upwards of maybe 15 or 20 stems in this pot, and I will tell you guys later how I got it to be this full. The first thing that I want to cover is the light that I give it. I have never ever needed to give this one any light from grow light. Just from my personal experience, this plant grows way better under regular diffused indirect lighting. It's a great office plant. My friend TJ actually had a micans about this large, if not larger, growing in his office, only growing under the fluorescent lights of his office. And it was the most beautiful, lush, amazing micans I have ever seen. It was even nicer than mine, honestly. The leaves were like almost black. They were so dark and beautiful. And yeah, I just really don't recommend using any kind of strong or harsh light for this plant. I would even try and keep it away from a window that gets direct light, even if it's for a few hours a day, because that can make all the difference. I once had this in my bedroom where we have a huge south-facing window right next to it, and it was only getting direct light for, I want to say, maybe a total of 2 hours a day or something, based on the location it was at. And the one side, I think it was this side over here that was closest to the window, all of those stems on that side were just like this bright red, bright yellow, bright orange. And I know some people are really into the sun-stressed look of the micans, but I personally love this plant for the really, really dark velvety leaves. So if you guys want dark leaves in terms of lighting, definitely pull them back away from windows. Don't get any harsh grow lights on them. They really don't need it. I've been growing this mican almost everywhere in the house. Because it was not this large when I got it, I was able to just have it on like this shelf here without it really taking up too much space. I had it in the kitchen at one point, I had it in my office, and no matter what the lighting situation was in terms of me thinking that it wasn't going to be enough light, it always did completely fine. So that's really all I have to say about lighting. I don't know if anyone has any experience growing the micans under a grow light or growing in harsh light or direct sunlight and being able to still have like these dark green leaves. But just my personal experience, I've always found that the darker leaves come with lower light. So we're gonna switch gears and talk about humidity. And I used to think when I first got this that this plant required so much humidity, mostly because it kind of just looks like a plant that would need high humidity. It's got like the same sort of leaf texture as a Melanochrysum, Gloriosum, Gigas, and some of those plants do a lot better in higher humidity. But just because you have a velvet leaf plant doesn't mean that it's automatically gonna suffer if it doesn't have high humidity. So when this plant was smaller, I always had it near a humidifier. I've never actually had it in a greenhouse, although I think there was a small period of time where I put it inside of my IKEA, which one was it? The Millsbow, the Millsbow tall. And I really only had it in there because it looked pretty in there and not because I felt like it needed to be in a greenhouse. But when it was out of a greenhouse, I definitely tried to keep a humidifier nearby if I could. But as time went on, I just realized that it didn't need it because I'd go away for long periods where the humidifier wasn't running, and then I'd come home and it's just like so much bigger and lusher than when I left. So I'm like, okay, clearly it's doing fine without high humidity. So really, I don't recommend the micans to be put in a greenhouse. I think that you should be able to have it wherever and enjoy it, like out in a living space or wherever. I don't necessarily feel like you need to have a humidifier nearby with this plant. Of course, it wouldn't hurt. Humidifier doesn't hurt if you have it. You know, the extra boost is always helpful, but I don't feel like you need to like stress about the humidity levels with this. Keep in mind though that my humidity ranges anywhere from like, honestly, like 25% up to like 35 on a good day. It is very, very dry in this apartment. My skin will like crack and dry if I don't put on lotion twice a day on my face. So a lot of plants that require high humidity don't do the greatest outside, especially in my living room where it's really dry. But the micans has been totally fine. No issues with leaves unfurling. Really I've noticed no issues with it living in really low humidity. And to sort of piggyback on the humidity requirements, I got a question asking if I mist my micans constantly, and the answer is no. I used to a lot, and this is when I was just going around misting everything in my collection. But that was really early on in the hobby when I wasn't very confident with a lot of these imported plants and I didn't understand them the way that I do now. But when you go around and like mist your plants out in an open space, you're not really boosting the overall humidity. You're gonna make the leaves wet for a little bit and then it's gonna dry. So it doesn't do much in terms of humidity, but I will say that if you have the tendency to have leaves that sort of get stuck. So if you're on my channel, you probably know what an emergent leaf looks like, but sometimes you will have, and I'm not talking specifically with this plant, I'm just saying plants in general. Sometimes plants living in low humidity, just depending on the plant, again, will get stuck like this. An emergent leaf has, I don't know what the actual name of it is, but there's like a film that keeps it closed. It's kind of like a very, very low adhesive glue, but it does melt away with water. So when you have plants living in high humidity, that humidity is going to melt that sort of film away and then the leaf can open. But when you have plants in lower humidity, that film just like gets stuck and it just stays like that, and then you'll see plants that can't unfurl, they'll just basically die as an emergent leaf. The only reason why I mist right now in this hobby is one, to foliar feed, because plants can take a certain amount of nutrients in through the stomata of the leaves, but two, it's really for those emergent leaves. Especially if it's not living in a greenhouse, if it's a plant that's living in low humidity, I will just give the emergent leaf a spray just to kind of melt away some of that film that's holding the emergent leaf closed, because it'll prevent a lot of ripping, it'll prevent a lot of like, you know, leaves not being able to come out of the caterpillar or whatever. So if you have a micans and you're noticing that your emergent leaves are getting ripped or they're just not opening, I would recommend spraying then at that point. But you can also give it showers, which is the next thing I want to talk about. This is probably one of my most I don't want to say high maintenance, but it's a plant that I give a lot of maintenance to because I love it so much and because I just don't want anything bad to happen to it. It does get almost a weekly shower. So I will throw in a video of how I give it a shower here, and it's really simple. It's just, you know, you chuck it in the shower, and mine is in no drainage, so sometimes I have to like wrap the vessel with like a plastic bag so that not a lot of water can get in there. But it's really not that hard to just like tip it over and drain. But I would recommend, if you're using no drainage, to cover it with some kind of plastic bag because it just makes it a lot easier. I always use warm water, not hot water, but warm water. I don't ever give my plant showers in like ice cold water. And I also find that the warm water helps melt that film away a lot easier. I do use soap on this plant, but I don't use it every single time because obviously with the amount of leaves that it has, I'm not gonna like sit there and like, you know, scrub away at every leaf. But on the, you know, special occasion where, I don't know, maybe like every 3 months or every 4 months, or if I've just found pests or something, I'll put the majority of the plant, or as much as I can, into like a bin. And then I'll fill that with soap and then go in there with the shower so that it's kind of just sitting in like soapy water. Obviously it's hard to get like the top part of it because you can't just submerge the whole thing, but I've just found that doing as much as you can definitely helps with eradicating any pests that you might have, which we will talk about in a bit. So yeah, in terms of showering, if you're wondering, I do shower this very regularly, not only to make sure that the emergent leaves are healthy, but also this plant sheds so much because of how much it grows. It comes out of these sheaths and then they dry up and then they just fall everywhere. Like if you guys see below me, there's just like a pool of sheaths. Another reason why I shower is because this plant produces so much EFN, it is not even funny. Let me just find the perfect leaf to show you. This is a very common thing that can happen on your micans. When I first started noticing these things, I first thought it was like some kind of like fungus or something. I have treated it before with a fungicide, like a copper fungicide. Didn't help at all, but I did notice that when my plants were pushing out all of this EFN and all of these spots, it was either spider mites or it was some kind of pest that was stressing the plant out, or it was when I would, oh, it's dripping now. It's when I would let my plant dry out, like completely dry out. So my conclusion that I came to is that this plant is a very, very visual storyteller in terms of telling you what it needs. So if it's stressed out at all, or if there are any pests on it, the leaves are like literally warning you like, hey, something is going on. It definitely needs to be repotted, and this plant has been so freaking thirsty, so it dries out pretty fast. And I don't like to leave like a really large reserve of water at the bottom because I am kind of scared that some of those thinner roots might rot. So I really only give it the amount of water it needs plus a little bit extra. So when this plant dries out completely, not only will the leaves curl a lot, but it just pushes out leaves with just spots, and like it's just so stressed and unhappy. I do see a little bit of EFN on this plant. If you guys don't know what EFN is, it's extra floral nectaries, and in the wild, you know, ants and insects would come and collect the EFN from the plant, but since there are no bugs here to collect them, well, not any effective bugs to collect them, it just kind of sits on the leaf and burns through it. So here are what these two leaves look like. So in terms of sort of combating the spots on the plant, I would definitely give it regular showers. And when you do give it showers, I would try and use either some kind of castile soap or just like a pesticide soap. I use Safer's pesticide soap, but I don't use it every time because I've also noticed that on the emergent leaves, when I use something really harsh, like a really harsh spider mite spray or a thrift spray or something, it does leave damage on the leaves. So I'm very cautious when I'm spraying my micans. I only use the really hard stuff when I'm dealing with like thrips or something, or I had that little bout with mealybugs and I freaked out, like really freaked out, and so I used it again. A lot of the damage on it could be from that treatment, but I'm thinking more so it's because I've been so busy and haven't been like regularly watering it, so it's probably stressed out. But also I noticed that like on the darker leaves you will see some spots, but it's more sort of hidden because the leaf is so dark. So when you have a plant when you have a leaf that's really light in color, of course you can see it a lot easier, but as it hardens off, you can't really see it, because I can see on this leaf right here, I can see a bunch of spots that would look very similar to this, but because the leaf is so dark, you can't really see it. I want to quickly just talk about a question that I got in regards to pests, and someone asked if the micans can be attacked by flat mites, and I am not the person to talk to about flat mites. I only recently discovered what they were. I don't have a microscope to see if my plants have flat mites, although based on the damage that I've been seeing online, I'm like 135% sure that I do have flat mites, but I have heard of people saying that they have found flat mites on their philodendron. So if I had to take a wild guess, I'm gonna say yes, but also I'm not 100% sure. I want to quickly talk about the substrate for micans and which one that I would recommend. I forgot if I mentioned this, but I received it as a 5-inch plant in soil, and it was actually doing quite fine in soil, in the original nursery soil, because it was really dense. There was a little bit of root rot at the bottom, but I think that was because it was with my sister and she was kind of just doing the bare minimum to keep it alive. I ended up moving it to a Wally Grow planter, which had very, very coarse, chunky soil, and the micans hated it. I don't even know how it lived in that Wally Grow for so long, because I was watering it like 2 times a week, like no joke, and I'm surprised that the whole plant didn't die just from how thirsty it would be, and like how I would be so on the like defense about watering it and not being really proactive about it, because I would just underestimate how fast it would dry out. And keep in mind, the Wally Grow has no drainage holes, so I would water, leave a ton of water at the bottom, and then, you know, most of it I feel like would evaporate. So I didn't trust myself using a really, really dense soil, but based on the watering needs of this plant, I just took the leap of faith and I put it in passive hydro with lechuzepon, which was like the best thing I have ever done for this plant. I honestly highly doubt that my plant would look like this now if it was still in soil. I feel like the micans is a plant that does appreciate having a little bit of water at all times as a reserve, and not being allowed to dry out, because when it's dry, again, like I said, it shows you that it's very unhappy, whether it's by curling leaves, dying leaves, spotty leaves, pushing out EFN. It's a little brat that way. And of course, I know that I'm biased in a way, but I much prefer using no drainage for the micans just because of how thirsty it is. And I don't know, it's just always done so much better in no drainage than with drainage. And it's been in no drainage for about 2.5 years now, and she's going strong. So yeah, I guess all that to say, if you want my opinion on what you should pot your micans in, it would be no drainage with lechuzepon. I even think leca would be a great substrate for it. I just would prefer anything but soil. Before we move on, I want to try and just show you guys the situation that we have here. So here are the roots. It's very, very algae ridden because this has been very close to a south-facing window, like I mentioned. It's just growing in my living room right now, which gets a good amount of sunlight. And so, you know, sunlight, clear vessel is the recipe for algae. But she is like super duper healthy. I do think that she's gonna need a repot a lot sooner than I would like to give her one. Since we've talked about water and the substrate, I want to just quickly talk about fertilizing. So before I was using TPS1, which is what I'm using now, I was pretty regularly using a combination of liquid gold leaf and CalMag. Liquid gold leaf is unfortunately not available anymore to be shipped out of the UK. I really loved that fertilizer. I thought it was great. It smelled like ass, but it was really great fertilizer. And then of course, you know, on this channel, I'm always preaching about CalMag, and I really feel like a lot of the success of this plant has been from CalMag as well. So I am not the type that's going to be on a fertilizing schedule and will remember who got fertilized and who didn't. So I basically just add 1/4 of the recommended dosage for each of the fertilizers that I'm using. I put it in my sprayer, and everybody gets sprayed whenever. You know, at least once a week, my plants are getting fertilizer. I try and not use my fertilizer water for plants that are very clearly dormant, so I wouldn't use it for like my cacti that haven't done anything in a long time. I have some like euphorbias that are stuck in time as well, so I try to avoid using that with dormant plants, even though it's a very diluted mix. But for everyone else, they get the spray and then they're done. So it's a very small amount of fertilizer on a weekly basis. And not only has that been easier for me to like remember and make sure that everyone does get fertilized, but it's just easier, and my plants don't seem to mind it. One of the most frequently asked questions that I get about my micans is, how do I grow it so full? And honestly, the only thing I can say is regular fertilizing and regular haircuts. In the 2.5 years or almost 3 years that I've owned this plant, I probably chopped off a total of maybe 15 to like 20 feet, maybe even more, because every time I give this a haircut, which is like every 3 months or something, I chop off at least like 2 feet. I think the most I've ever chopped off was like 5 feet. There was one time where I even chopped one that was like taller than me. Granted, I'm not super tall, I'm 4'11", but it was like much taller than me. So I really chop it back. The reason why I chop this plant so much is because I basically want to activate as many auxiliary buds as possible. So you can see some of this like growth here that's like growing just randomly up at the top. Some of them are coming from the base, but some of them are coming from auxiliary buds where I've cut really high. And by doing that, you fill in the areas where it would normally be very sparse. And it does take a good amount of time to get that sort of full look. You're not gonna get it after like 2 or 3 chops. It's gonna take, I don't know, I feel like it took like a solid year for my plant to look really bushy, because it did look pretty sparse before. So just be patient. Keep chopping back. Don't think that you're stunting the growth or you're gonna, you know, set it back by the haircuts. I'm telling you, the haircuts is what makes it full. I know it sounds kind of like backwards, but if I did not chop this as many times as I did, this thing would probably be like 80 feet long, but be so like gangly and stringy. So chop your micans, don't be scared. I promise you, it's gonna get full. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, because I got this question pretty frequently too, and it's asking about how you get leaves that are big and not have them get really tiny. So, I mean, I have that happening in some places, like up at the base, there are really tiny leaves that are brand new, but on some of my older stems, all of the leaves are pretty like standard size. They're like a good size. They're not like itty bitty. I really think a big part of the reason why I'm not growing those really tiny leaves is because my plant has matured so much over the years that the stem is really thick. And the thicker that your stem is, more than likely your leaves are gonna be bigger. So if you look at some of your stems that have the really tiny leaves, you'll probably notice that the stem is really stick thin. So the reason why they're so thick now is because I've just chopped them away so much. And every time like an auxiliary bud grows from the stem, it's almost like a continuation of where it would have been at the bottom. And then the stem grows back actually thicker than if you were to just let it trail and the leaves get smaller and smaller, the stem gets smaller and smaller. Again, I feel like chopping is a huge part of being able to grow like a really nice, big, lush, healthy micans. So if you're noticing the really teeny tiny leaves, give it a chop, like a really good chop. Like I'm talking like bowl cut, like really chop that thing. And then again, CalMag. CalMag is great for like the cell structure of the new leaves. It, you know, makes it grow really like healthy and green. And if you're not using CalMag already, If there's anything you take away from this video, is get a micans and get some CalMag. Before we move on to the next topic, I'm going to chop this plant because I want to show you guys that I do it and I'm not just bullshitting you, and I want to show you exactly how much I cut every time. So there are quite a few stems in here. I know there's one stem in particular that's really, really long and gangly. So we've got this guy. Gosh, these leaves are massive. Look how big this one is. No, it doesn't even look that big. So we've got this guy here. I'm just gonna chop it like right here. We've got this long dude right here. I see a little aerial root that's gonna be great to put in water. And that is a massive leaf. So I'm just gonna chop again. Because this plant has like thickened up so much, I don't need to chop off as much every time now, but I still try and chop off a decent amount so that it doesn't get leggy at the bottom. I'm gonna chop there. Got a really, really long internode here, so I'll chop there. And then got this long boy. Got a really long internode there, so I'm gonna chop. And then there's this one. I try and chop it like bangs, like straight across really, like you don't, I try to not like have it sort of staggered because I feel like it grows back a little bit weird if it's not even the whole way. So, oh, this is a great example to show you guys. Okay, so now it is not touching the floor anymore. I've got all of this that I cut off. I want to show you this because it's a good example of the work we've done over time. So here is one stem. So you'll see that this is the main stem right here. And I would have chopped probably close to where this node is because this auxiliary bud right here woke up, and there's where this new plant is growing from. Going along the main stem again right here, I chopped before down here and it activated this auxiliary bud. So this is a totally separate plant on its own. So there's actually like 3 plants really on this one stem. And if you look at how it's growing, it's like this is a lot bushier than if I would have just left this one stem, because now I've got this extra growth point and this extra growth point that has filled in on one stem. And the more you keep doing that, like the more this plant is gonna do stuff like this and start just randomly branching out and pushing out growth points everywhere. And that's how you get it to look full. Period. I want to quickly talk about propagating the micans because it can be a little bit difficult in my experience. I used to have a really low success rate in terms of how many cuttings I would take and how many would actually turn into something and not just melt or just dry up completely. It's totally fine to propagate stems this long. I usually go for a little bit shorter of a stem, like I'd probably cut this in half, but it really doesn't matter how long you want to propagate your stem. In the past, I've done pretty much every method of propagation for the micans, some with better success rates than others. One of the main hiccups you'll see when coming across propagating micans is that it can be a very slow rooter. So in the time that it's trying to grow roots, you might lose a lot of leaves, or the leaves might completely curl and never uncurl. And this is why I only really do the 2-cup method now with the micans. So the 2-cup prop method is very, very easy. It's essentially using the same concept as like using a cloche or something. So if you've got long stems like this is the method that I would recommend. And what you do is you just take your cuttings. You don't really need to have them callus over. These long ones will be totally fine. And to the best of your ability, you basically just shove the whole thing in there. Obviously for a plant this large, I would probably use like one of my really large clear vessels and then maybe just saran wrap it on top. I'm basically just like twirling it into here. So you would just do something like that. You just stick it in there and then you get a second cup and you just enclose it and you can tape it or rubber band it or do whatever, and just add a little bit of water down at the bottom. And honestly, just give it a few days and a lot of these auxiliary buds, or not auxiliary buds, but the nodes are going to activate and you'll get roots everywhere. So then you can either just pot it as a trailing plant, or you can just chop it into nodes and it's easier to propagate that way. Otherwise, if you're propagating single nodes, my recommendation would be to let these ends callus up, because the smaller stems, when it's not like a long stem, I find that these tend to just mush and turn into like dust when you put it into a prop bin. But if you allow these ends to callus up before you stick it into, let's say, like a perlite bin or like a moss bin, these stems will stay firm, and you know, it's going to take a while for any roots to grow. So you want to make sure that in that time frame your stem is not going to rot and die. I would at least allow it to callus for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes until this like fleshy tissue part sort of like hardens and becomes like a oxidized brown color. And that's how you can avoid having really mushy stems in a prop box. And then finally, this is more of a preference, but I have been asked whether I prefer my micans to trail or climb. Obviously, I prefer a trailing micans. Not only do I find it to be more beautiful, I just find it to be way less maintenance and just way easier to grow as a trailing plant. Once upon a time, I wanted to try and get a micans to climb. It was more so just to see if I could do it. But as the micans matures, I don't really like the way it looks. It kind of loses its sparkly sheen. It loses that deep velvety color. But of course, it also depends on your growing conditions. But I haven't really seen a mature micans that I love. But I'm always floored at anyone's trailing micans. I just think they're beautiful. So I'm not the person to talk to if you are trying to get your micans to climb and mature and get bigger, because I've never successfully done it myself. But yeah, I definitely prefer a trailing micans. So I think that is it in terms of everything I wanted to talk about. But if you kind of want a too long didn't read version, very quickly, light, I prefer lower light. Humidity, in my experience, does not need high humidity, but if you're noticing issues with the leaves unfurling out of its little taquito, you could spray. Potting, I 100% prefer Lechuzapon over soil and in no drainage. For water, I always leave a little reserve of water down at the bottom and try to not let it dry out, because if you do, it will show you that it's unhappy. Fertilizer, CalMag, diluted fertilizing every week in your water, and it's more of a just do it and forget about it, but make sure you're really diluting that fertilizer. I, again, use the fertilizer at 1/4 strength. Showers, if you can shower on a weekly basis, I would say that's ideal, but if you can only do it like every other week or every 2 weeks, that's better than nothing. But I definitely would not recommend not showering it, just because of the EFN buildup, how prone it is to pests, and with all those sheaths kind of just hanging onto the stem, it can get a little bit messy looking. So shower it if you can. And then propagating, like we mentioned, 2-cup method for the trailing plants, and then like a perlite or moss prop box for the single nodes, and make sure you guys let those callus up. I think that's it. So if you guys have any other questions that I didn't talk about, please feel free to leave it in the comments and I would be happy to answer your questions there. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Again, what I say is not the end all be all. This is just my recommended care based on my experience with the plant over the last few years. And yeah, hopefully if you guys came to this video because you're struggling with your micans, that some of these tips might have helped you. And if not, I'm so sorry. But keep trying. There's a lot of times where I thought I was gonna give up on this plant, but she is very resilient. She can glow up really fast if you give her the time and if you have the patience. So Yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you liked it, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up because it helps us a lot on YouTube. Thank you guys for watching another video, and I will see you in the next one.